Thanks for joining 374 Water's session on PFAS remediation, technology, and innovation. This is a session from the front lines. My name is Lisa Newberger Fernandez, and I'm 374 Water's Head of Sustainability and Ecosystems. This session is part of our Sustainable Futures platform, which is all about bringing together pioneers and practitioners on the front lines of waste, water, energy, and the circular economy to learn together, to share, and to find opportunities for innovation. And today, I'm thrilled to be your host. We have an amazing lineup here. And I'm joined by Howard Carter, Director for Water Resource Recovery, for the Water Resource Recovery Department in the city of Saco, Maine. Also, Jeff Privat from Pima County Regional Wastewater Reclamation Department in Arizona, and Sunny Visnawathan, who's VP and Head of Customer Solutions at 374 Water. I've been privileged to have a chance to get to know these three amazing pioneers a bit in advance of the session, so I know that you all have a number of things in common, including a great desire to do something about PFAS, and also a penchant for innovation, for pilots, for experimentation, and for science-based results. So with that, I'd like to kick us off with a round of introductions, but this is not meant to be your typical introduction, things that we can read on the internet. This is a question for you, and I'd like to start with Howard. The question is, what got you into the wastewater industry, and what's kept you here after all these years?
Great question. Well, I've been around water my whole life growing up on coastal Maine. I've always been within 3 miles of the coast, and grandparents had a camp inland and everything. But my first career, I worked for the Department of Navy for 12 years. The time I left, I was a supervisor mechanical and piping and nuclear side of submarine work. When I left that industry, it was because of a reduction in force, mostly because of the end of the Cold War with the Russians. So I took a placement test and it said, well, you should be in water or wastewater. Oh, okay, sounds good. So I went to school for that, and 30-something years later, here I am. Why do I stay in it? Well, I think at the end of the day, you can go home and know you've done something good for the environment or your community or whatever. The people in this field are great. I can count on one hand how many people in this industry that I do not like. And nobody ever leaves once they get into it. And they may go from a consultant to an engineer or to equipment manufacturers, but they all stay. They really do. And that's the biggest thing I like about it. It's a good people industry.
That's great. Well, you guys are three examples of good people. And two admirable public servants here. So Jeff, I'm going to hand it over to you with the same question, but as you get going, I did notice one thing online that I'd like you to explain. It says that you are a spectrometrist, and I might be saying that wrong. Please explain what that means.
Sure. So my graduate degree is in analytical chemistry. So I also own a spectroscopy company, and we distribute products to universities and research institutions all over the world. And so I've lived my whole life in Arizona. I love Arizona, but as many of you are aware, Arizona doesn't have a lot of water resources. And where I live in southern Arizona, we're in Tucson, Arizona, we're completely groundwater based. We have no surface water here. I grew up in the town of Yuma, which is right on the Mexico, California, Arizona border. And Yuma receives a substantial amount of biosolids from California because of our large agricultural base there. So in continuing, I'm deputy director for treatment for Pima County's 7 wastewater treatment facilities, but also I oversee innovation. So I work very closely with universities throughout the country, throughout the world, but mostly with University of Arizona. The University of Arizona's West Center, I help design and create, and it's actually located on our property. I lease to them. So if you're looking for rocket scientists, you probably call MIT first, maybe Caltech second. We wanted to set up something here in Southern Arizona. When you're looking for process control engineers, you're coming to Southern Arizona. And so that's the whole premise of the West Center. We take projects that are, too large for piloting at the universities, maybe 500,000 gallon a day pilot. We pilot at our facility, and then we'll go out to our individual treatment plants for bigger pilot projects. And so PFAS is always on our minds, especially in Southern Arizona. We have a lot of military bases. We have a lot of groundwater contamination. And so happy to be here and part of this broadcast.
Thanks, Jeff. And if you had to summarize, like, what got you interested in this field and what's kept you here for so long?
I enjoy the daily challenge, the research and innovation role, and finding solutions to problems and bringing new technologies. If there's a good technology out there, we ought to all be using it. And so helping scale those things up so that it's mainstream. As public utilities, we're all risk averse. And so we want to see it work somewhere else before it's adopted at a larger scale. And so I think here in Southern Arizona with our West Center and our relationships, we do a lot of one-offs. We bring a lot of new technologies, and maybe it's the first installation in the US. We do a lot of that here because everybody should benefit from that. And it takes quite a while to get stuff implemented here in the States, and I'd like to change that.
Fantastic. Thank you. Well, Sunny, you know the question. Let's see if you can answer it somewhat differently than last time.
Oh, yeah. Oh, well, yeah, I know, I believe you have covered this before, but yeah, my interest in the science of, environmental management began when I was young. I was, in high school at the time. I watched a documentary where environmental scientists were looking for drinking water that was untouched by humans. At that time, I thought it would be a simple task, but it was not. That's when I realized that there's a finite amount of water, and that got me hooked on this pursuit of preserving this valuable resource, and I haven't looked back since. And the reason I'm still here is because of what both Jeff and Howard mentioned, which is the people I work with are great, and the innovation aspect of it, that's what keeps me going. So it's a combination of those two answers is what really has me going here for the past 24 years.
Well, you don't show your age, Sunny. I'll just put that out there. So our next topic here that we've gotten to know each other a little bit is about the PFAS challenge. So you've all pretty much said the acronym for PFAS. And we're lucky today to have perspectives from 3 different states, from Arizona, from Maine, and from North Carolina. And I'd love you each to go and describe the PFAS challenge that you're facing in your state, and then talk a bit about how you're tackling that. And I'd like to start with Howard.
Oh, thanks. Well, I think as most of you know, the PFAS challenge really started to develop here in Maine a couple of years ago, when it first started showing up in some milk. The state started having all us utilities test for PFAS, P4, and all the different acronyms involved with that. And they give us, we're doing surveillance only, we're watching it. Most of us, till recently, went to compost, beneficial reuse. There wasn't that much land that really left. But then an outbreak showed up in the middle of the state. There was a lot of paper mill biosolids applied with a lot of municipal. So what the state did is grouped us all together, passed emergency legislation to ban all land application of biosolids, and that includes composting. So that really put us into a bit of a tizzy. That was last year. We were scrambling. So the state mandated everybody to go to landfill, and they were telling us there's about 5 years of capacity left in the landfills. That's proven not really to be true, because there's more just the capacity of the biosolids you need. You need the bulky waste to mix with that biosolid so your piles don't slow. So we ran into an instance last February where we didn't have enough bulky waste to do a lot of this disposal via the landfill. So some of it's been diverted to Canada right now because where we're going. I'm fortunate enough to go to beneficial reuse still in New Hampshire. I've got a 2-year contract with that, but going forward is really an issue. Here we won't allow land application in places like California, that's all they do is promote land application. So what's the answer going to be? And what's the technology to get us there? But the bottom line is, I think as an industry, we have to stop hauling water. We just can't be hauling biosolids around it, 18 to 30%, whatever that number's gonna be. So whether we get there through dryers or some of these different technologies we'll discuss today is still up in the air, in my opinion.
Thanks, Howard, for sharing with us a perspective from Maine. And Jeff, let's move over to Arizona and talk us through the PFAS challenge in Arizona and how you're tackling that.
Okay, so like I mentioned, other than right along the border with where Yuma in California is, we have no surface water. We have the Colorado there, but for the most part, we're all groundwater based in Arizona. So any instance where we've had a military base or Air National Guard or even airports, we see PFAS contamination, both in the Phoenix Valley area and in southern Arizona. And so all of our water utilities they're doing an exceptional job treating the groundwater remediation from those locations. And that's being done with a lot of activated carbon, which we capture it, but then that's got its own waste disposal options. Here in Arizona, I feel for Howard. That's quite a challenge to have to find all these outlets and avenues to move your product, especially in the cold weather that you have up north in the winter. Out here, we're lucky enough, sun shines every day in southern Arizona, and that's why we have such a big agricultural base. And so we really rely on land application for the beneficial reuse of the biosolids, and we import a lot of it from California to the Central Valley and Yuma valleys for ag growth. We took a 1-year moratorium in 2020 from land application to ascertain what impact our biosolids may be having. As we sequester PFAS in biosolids and do land application, were we contributing to the problem? And so we took a 1-year moratorium. We landfilled biosolids for that year, and we undertook a study where we went out to land application sites that have received biosolids for 5 years or less, 10 to 20 years, greater than 20 to 30 years at different loading rates. And we did site evaluations at surface, 1 foot, 3 foot, and 6 foot depths. And our goal was to ensure that we were doing no further harm, that the PFAS wasn't migrating to groundwater, it was being captured there. But it still is a source because it does concentrate in the solids. So technologies like yours at 374 Water that allow to treat that in the biosolids waste before it's land applied, very attractive to us. And so we'd like to explore other options too. Point source is obviously the way to go to try to curtail PFAS contamination, and largely that's been done, but it's still out there, and we've got to treat the contaminated groundwater for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Jeff, you talked about PFAS migration in soil and the results of the study. You also talked about the weather. You made a comment about the cold weather in the Northeast. I wonder if the research has shown, or if there's other research taking place to understand if the PFAS migration varies by weather, if there's more rain, if there's more water flowing, and also if the migration varies in terms of moving into food sources. Any comments?
Yeah, so good points. And so there are a lot of models out there that look at weather patterns and conditions, whether a Tucson soil or Arizona soil is comparable to New Jersey. We've done those, and those are out there, and they kind of all indicate, at a rainfall rate of X, you can expect to see groundwater penetration at 100 feet after 30 years, 40 years, that type of scenarios. But there are 2 research projects going on right now that I'm involved in. One is EPA funded. This is the Water Research Foundation, and it's looking at the fate and effects, and it's actually looking at PFAS uptake in different types of crop scenarios, whether it's cotton, vegetables, fruits, and that type of stuff. So it's looking for uptake from the soil. Then another project that we're involved in, and this involves CASA on the West Coast, California Association of Sewer Agencies, and also NEBRA on the East Coast. We have 17 states and I think 23 different land application sites that are involved in that study. And essentially it's a replicate of what we did in 2020 when we're looking at soils at 1 foot, 3 foot, and 6 foot depths for exactly what you just postulated. Is it different in Michigan or different in Maine because you guys have different soil characteristics, different loading rates, and different soil saturation because of rainfall? And so we're doing those experiments right now the next 2 years, characterize that to say, how is this sequestering in soil? Is it being uptaken by the crops? Is it sequestered in the organic layer? Or is it being driven through the soil column because of infiltration and rainfall? So that's really good work that's underway right now. We started it last year and it should probably be done in about another year. And that'll be a really nice broad spectrum canvassing of the entire US.
I look forward to seeing the results of that. Sunny, help us paint the picture of what's maybe similar or different in North Carolina.
Yeah, North Carolina is not unlike these two states. In fact, I think it's a good combination of these two scenarios, because if you go out west, there is still land application. So that's the predominant way of disposition of biosolids from wastewater treatment. But if you go to the eastern part of the state, especially if you traverse along the Cape Fear Basin, you'll find that most of the biosolids that are produced in those plants are not being land applied because of heavy contamination from PFAS. And this, of course, also impacts the drinking water, right? Because the new regulations that are being proposed would have those MCLs that are low enough that if you were on the Cape Fear Basin, you're not going to have a facility that would not require additional treatment. So just to give you some example on the size of the problem here in North Carolina, we looked at all the drinking water facilities in our state. So there are about 383 or so drinking water facilities in North Carolina, of which about 30 to 45% of those facilities. So we're talking about a good 120 to 175% of those drinking water facilities have levels of either PFOA or PFOS, which both are the PFAS compounds that are being regulated in addition to 4 other compounds, are above those thresholds, the maximum contamination levels that EPA is proposing, which means there's going to be a significant amount of investment that needs to go into our state to bring those water quality up to those minimum standards. We just did a very quick back of the envelope calculation for removal of PFAS from drinking water, as well as looking at destructive technology like 374's AirSCO or supercritical water oxidation technologies. And we're talking about investments in the range of the high millions to up to $1 billion just in our state. So you can imagine if you multiply that over the entire US, all 50 states, even if it's a simple one-to-one equation, we are looking at nearly $50 to $60 billion investment just for bringing up to code our drinking water standards.
Oh, those are big numbers.
Yeah.
And we've been talking about the problem and we've been looking backwards, but let's shift gears now and look forwards. And I'm interested in hearing from each of you about what you consider to be the state of the art of PFAS destruction technologies. And if you had a magic wand that you could wave with unlimited funding and unlimited time, which of course none of us have, where would you point that wand in terms of new investments and focus on innovation in this space? And just to change it up a little bit, Jeff, why don't we start with you? Oh, and you're on mute.
I was reading the chat here and I missed the question because somebody was asking if the reports would be available. And so I'll post that at the end where they can download the reports for sure.
No, Lisa's on mute.
Oh, no,
So
I'm on mute.
Sorry, go ahead.
Jeff, where can those reports be downloaded? And thanks for noticing the chat, and to whoever wrote that, thank you. And other people listening into this session, please put questions in the question answer button, and I promise to pay more attention to those from now on.
Yes, I'll make sure that it's uploaded today on pima.gov, and if you'll drill down to the wastewater website, you'll see reports there, and I'll make sure it's uploaded by the end of the day.
Wow, well, that's fast
FEMA.gov
government service
wastewater.
right there. So, Jeff, let me repeat the question. So we want to shift gears from looking at the past and the problems to looking at the future and the solutions. And so the question is, when you think about PFAS destruction technologies, what do you consider to be state of the art right now? And if you had a magic wand that you could wave with unlimited funds and unlimited time, where would you want to see investments in pilots and more innovation in your state?
Sure. So on the drinking water side, where we're remediating water, I would like to see more regenerative type processes, because sequestering it in resins or carbon that didn't have to be disposed or incinerated, stuff like that's just, you're just taking it out of a liquid phase, putting it in a solid phase, and it becomes somebody else's headache. On the biosolids phase, I'm really against this trend towards incineration of biosolids, and because then that takes away the beneficial reuse of a product that we rely heavily on out west. We do a lot of land application for the agricultural benefit, and to see that disappear, regenerative soil, regenerative farming, it's critical. We'd end up in dust bowls like Kansas in the 20s again if we didn't have that organic mass holding the soil, and you see the haboobs and the dust storms we have out west here. So it's a really good thing. There's been a big migration in the industry towards biochar, and we see a lot of that in Europe as well, but I'm really interested in interim processes, including yours, that would probably go between our digested sludge and maybe dewatering process, where you can remove the PFAS from the liquid stream and then still get the agricultural benefits of dewatering and land application as well. So here in Arizona, because we're not sure where regulations are going to go with PFAS, we're constructing a very large solar dryer here in Tucson. And so we'll go from 180 wet tons to 46 dry tons in 24 hours. It's going to be really unique, taking into account heated floors, radiant solar as well, using thermal storage from waste heat recovery throughout our facility, and concentrated solar on an adjacent parcel. And so our goal is to develop something unique. If we can't dry biosolids in southern Arizona, it can't be done, right? It's either here, Saudi Arabia, or that's all. We have more sun than we know what to do with. And so our goal is to try to maintain that and make a much smaller product. So to go from 180 wet tons to 46 dry tons. So I'm saving on transportation costs, moving that, not moving water around the state. But if PFAS regulations become even more stringent, or even a moratorium like we've experienced here in Maine, at least I have a much smaller product to deal with. I'm only dealing with 46-ton disposal a day instead of 180 tons. But I would still like that interim technology that removes PFAS from my liquid stream. Now I can continue having all the benefits of biosolids and land application. So that's where I would like to see piloting and technologies go.
Great, Jeff. I'm ready to start singing the song. If you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. This big hot state. I grew up partially in Texas, so I'm familiar with the big hot states. And Jeff, before we move on to Howard, one question came in for you, which says, is Pima County able to regenerate activated carbon contaminated with PFAS, or is it landfilled?
So currently in Casa Grande, which if you're familiar with Arizona, it's midway in the state, kind of between the western half of the state and Phoenix. That's the carbon regeneration facility for all of Arizona, I think for the Southwest. So carbon goes there, they do a steam regeneration, but even doing that, you can do that so many times and then the product loses its value. And so it's not a permanent solution. So carbon right now, it's kind of a cheap process. It's not cheap. It's probably the least expensive of the options that are available right now, but it still poses a challenge. But that's what's being done right now. But most people, especially when in the drinking water side, I don't think the drinking water folks are purchasing regenerated carbon. they want fresh virgin stuff because they're serving that to their customers and they don't want the liability. So I think you'll see that carbon used once, it's regenerated, maybe it's going into like a odor control systems and stuff like that. But would you buy a refurbished PC or a refurbished, you're not going to want refurbished carbon when you're serving it to your customers, I don't believe.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. One more before we move to Howard. You're getting lots of questions here, Jeff. You're sparking a lot of excitement. So Jeff, you mentioned the proximity of military installations in Arizona contributing to PFAS, PFOA in the state. How are you working with installations to resolve the groundwater contamination?
So they're all working they've been working with this. Department of Defense have been working with all the states and ADQ, our local agency, and EPA for a number of years. It's all borders down to who's going to pay for the remediation, which that's the 3M lawsuit that we see nationwide that many states and many cities are part of. But the Department of Defense and the military installations, at least here in Arizona, they're all very compliant and working towards a common solution. And typically we have community outreach meetings every quarter, every 6 months, and they fund a lot of the evaluations that are being done to the Department of Environmental Quality. So I think they're all active.
Thank you. All right, Howard. So now it's your turn. If you had a magic wand to wave on unlimited funding for innovation, investment in PFAS destruction technologies, where would you point that? What do you consider to be state of the art right now that you'd be interested in piloting and experimenting with?
Well, I think the first thing we ought to look at, and this is all the landfills that are contaminated in the defense sites and all those things aside. We seriously need to look at source reduction. We got to stop this at its source. In the state of Maine, the Department of Environmental Protections has us been testing our effluent for about 7 months now. And also at the same time within the city, we're testing our effluent around different industries in different parts of the city, and consistently, even when you're in residential neighborhoods, you're getting in 15, 17 parts per trillion of PFAS. Even though there's none in the water supply, it's coming from folks. And how are we going to stop that? And do people even want it to stop? You know, they still want it on their clothing and everything else and their mascara. So I think the first thing to do, and we're looking at in Maine, along with the New England Water Pollution Control, Interstate Water Pollution Control, is in NEBRA, is to do like a bio or a regional facility to test a lot of these new technologies. The state of Maine, we just don't have facilities big enough to really take this on for ourselves. When you go from $71 a wet ton to $240 a wet ton for disposal, you just fry your budget. You don't really have a lot of money left for R&D or anything else. And that's really where we're at. I really want to look at the supercritical. Been working with Sunny on it, is just the cost of doing that. You know, you've got the 6-ton unit or the 20-ton unit. What if you're in between? There's really not a good spot at this point. So I think another thing we got to seriously look at is we got to go back and look at digestion. I think if we're gonna get rid of the beneficial reuse to the land, we might as well start making power for it now, because not only are we getting green credits for electricity, they're now starting to get green credits out for gas. And how do we create some of this green energy to fund Biden's car charges? One thing, they want green energy. There's a source of it right there. And that also gives us a reduction of solids. You know, right now the technology is at 40–50%. I think there's a lot of money going into that as well to try to get that reduction down to 75%. But then what do you do with the biosolids after that? And that's really what the question is going to be. Is it going to be supercritical? Is it going to be pyrolysis or one of those type of things? I agree with Jeff. I'm not a big thing in the biochar and putting it back. I would agree with destruction and then just have the minerals back, because today is PFAS. What's it going to be tomorrow or the next day or the next day? I don't think this is ever going to stop. So if I had a crystal ball and unlimited money, yes, I would have a regional facility to test all these different things and let the next one going forward. Sure, some of the big communities are going to be in the lead. They're going to take a jump out on some of these, like we saw when Sunny and I at the big biosolids conference in Charlotte a month ago. But They're out there, it's just what's gonna be the best one. And not every facility, like Jeff has alluded to, is the same. You can have a 2 MGD facility, or you could have a 200 MGD facility. It's gonna be different fixes for each area, whether it's regional hubs or whatnot.
Maybe you could help us understand the range of destruction technologies that are out there. I've noticed the EPA have studied 4 of them. Maybe you could shed some light on that and put into context the comments from Howard and Jeff.
Oh yeah, that's a good segue here. So yes, EPA has done a considerable amount of work on various destruction technologies. They looked at a few electrochemical oxidation. There was some mechanical destruction. Then of course pyrolysis and gasification, which both Jeff and Howard mentioned, and supercritical water oxidation. Now, if you look at this, these technology ranges, the first few are mostly applicable for liquid treatment. So PFAS or other contaminants, organic contaminants in liquids, that's where they perform best. Of course, pyrolysis and gasification and supercritical water oxidation, especially our air source system, which is designed for slurries, are able to handle those sludges. Of course, I may have a very biased opinion about this, but of course, I totally believe that supercritical water oxidation, especially the way we do it, has the best outcome. In other words, we are able to completely destroy PFAS, that's known, but we are doing that without producing any byproducts that require any further treatment. In other words, we are not producing a gas that may potentially have PFAS that requires an additional step to defluorinate those wastes. With our technology, you're able to lower the risks associated with not just PFAS like we are talking about today, but as Howard mentioned, what's next? There could be pharmaceuticals that we learn is causing a havoc. There could be microplastics. It could be any other type of organic based waste that's out there. With our technology, you're able to completely eliminate those risks because you're destroying all of those in the process, leaving only the good nutrients that you may need for soil amendment and such. In terms of the investments, right? I mean, we talked about money being a factor in most of the scenarios. Aside from the money that's set aside by the federal government, if I had the magic wand that you promised I would have one, I would have some kind of a mechanism set in place where the polluters, like the folks who manufacture PFAS or use this compound extensively in subsequent product production, be held accountable to some extent and foot the bill. So implementation of technologies like our supercritical water oxidation becomes far more easy for end users like Jeff and Howard, who may benefit from this, but may not necessarily have to go to the ratepayers to asking for monies to implement these emerging technologies.
Thanks. One question that came in, and I open it up to whoever wants to answer it. If you think about the solutions that you've been describing, are these solutions like permanent solutions? We can implement them and then move on to something else, or will we need to continue to be treating in new ways, for the end of time?
So yeah, let me take that question first, and I'll let the other speakers chime in. With our technology, of course, maybe our current focus is being on PFAS, but it was never really developed as a PFAS alone technology, right? It was developed to transform organic waste into something benign and useful. So even past the PFAS regulations or the next wave of whatever the contaminant is, you will still have the benefits of getting rid of or rather converting the organic waste into just the nutrients and the energy fraction and recover water in the process. So this is not a very finite application. You could continue using it long after these regulations are, or the goals for the regulations are met.
Jeff, would you like to add anything?
I agree with Sonny completely. Once you have a tool in your toolbox, why would you ever want to discontinue using it? You would find other applications, and there's, 10 years ago, we were talking about pharmaceuticals in the waste streams. Now we're talking about PFAS. There'll be something, it's going to be lithium from all the car batteries in another 10 years. It'll be something. It's never going to go away. There's always something else on the radar. We weren't talking about PFAS 15 years ago because we didn't have triple quad mass spectrometers that could detect it. We didn't realize the extent of the problem until the technology made that available. And then we saw how widespread it was. And so there's always going to be opportunities for implementing these technologies. I don't think there'll be one and done. No.
Mhm.
Jeff, I see you've been very diligently responding to questions in the QA section. Thank you for doing that. One of them that I believe you responded to is talking about the research. You said you talked about the study in Arizona and the 1-year moratorium. What was the outcome of the study and any differential impacts observed given the different longevities of the application? You talked about different time horizons.
And so I in the very first chat, I did post a link so people can download it, but essentially it verified that, at least in our soils here, that the PFAS was sequestered in the first few feet, that it wasn't making it to groundwater at all. And plots that had received biosalts for 30 years versus plots that received for the last 5 years, there was very little difference in the PFAS concentration. So it wasn't accumulating in the soils either, whether it was being uptaken in the crops or being transformed, it's unclear, but we were convinced it wasn't harming groundwater. So we went back to land application after 1 year. This study allowed us to lift the moratorium. We resumed our normal application. And that's precisely what's going on right now with the nationwide study. And so it would be real, that's where the real benefit is. Even in here in Arizona, is it different along the Yuma where the soil's more sandy and there's the Colorado infiltration? Very, very shallow surface to a water table depth there versus here in Tucson where we're maybe 100 feet to groundwater. And so it's going to be different throughout the country. And so I think from a community perspective, you want to know if you're protecting your residents and your citizens and you're doing no further harm, and whether you can continue with practices like that. Obviously, in the case of Howard, where you have a lot of industrial users that are generators of PFAS, it's not really the municipal entity, it's these other point source things that are, one bad apple spoils the whole batch in that respect. And so really being able to characterize the point sources that need to be treated and giving the green, check mark pass, these are acceptable, these we need to deal with a little bit more stringently. I think that's the key for contamination on any topic, control the ones and repair the issues that need to be dealt with. But the one broad brush approach that everybody fits in the same shoe, that's tough.
Mhm.
So Howard, I'm going to turn to you. The next topic here is about barriers to adoption of these innovative technologies. And you guys have raised a number of barriers to adoption as we've gone along. You've talked about funding as an issue. You've talked about regulation and perhaps the uncertainty of regulation. You've also talked about the different sizes of facilities and how that affects what can be applied, and aging infrastructure and other things. So Howard, I'm curious for your perspective on what can we learn in this space about how to overcome the barriers to adoption of these new technologies that maybe you've seen work in Maine with other technologies that have been adopted successfully by the state. Any lessons that we can learn from and potentially apply here?
Well, I think Jeff hit the nail right on the head in the beginning. The water industry is very risk adverse. There's no doubt about that. Of course, the drinking water folks are a lot more than we have. I think you just got to find early adopters, someone who's not afraid to make that decision. And I've done that a lot over my career. if it passes a straight face test, I'd be willing to try it. I might not be on the bleeding edge, but I don't mind being on the cutting edge. But it comes back again to the affordability issue, and that's really what it comes down to. That's why I hope to partner with Sunny on one of these units here in Saco. And back to the earlier conversation, I do like the supercritical aspect of it because it takes care of the biosolid side of it. Yeah, we can deal with the effluent with newer technologies that comes out, but at least if we can get rid of the organics portion of it, I think we can close that book and move on and still use digestion or whatever. But I think it's just gonna have to be a mindset, it's gonna be regulation. Where do we get some funding? I think we're gonna have to continue to go down to Capitol Hill, say what we're up against, we're already, looks like we're gonna be on the circle list and some of those type of things. And it's gonna be public perception. We gotta get away from that. We'll look like as the polluters again, which I thought we got rid of that 10 or 15 years ago, but now with PFAS, people are still thinking that we're the bad apple here. So you're gonna have to get out in your community and say what's really going on and get the public behind you to try some of these different things and to fund some of these different things. All the different things we can say is still gonna come down to money at the end of the day.
And Sunny, as you're thinking about how to overcome barriers to adoption, a couple questions have come in that you could address. One says, how does supercritical water oxidation, how does SQO work with secondary and tertiary treatment streams? And how is it perhaps limited by MGD?
Okay. That's a different webinar altogether because our technology essentially works well with concentrated waste. So we don't treat liquids. We remove the contaminants from the liquid to another medium like ion exchange or GAC or sludge, and we treat the sludge. So we are not treating essentially the secondary or the tertiary waste as is, but we are working with other companies who are able to replace the current flocculation methodologies for settling out solids with other mediums that are able to also concentrate PFAS within them. So you can remove PFAS from liquids, but it has to be concentrated onto something else. In our case, it will be either a sludge or some other type of a media. That's what we are going to be able to treat within our system. So the MGD question doesn't exactly apply here because we are not treating liquids.
And Sunny, what would you add to the, oh, I see Jeff has put his hand up. Go for it, Jeff.
Well, you said something interesting there, Sonny. So I agree with you. It's not made for liquid waste, but my mind is noodling while we're talking here. Initially, I thought, well, this would be a very good application for digested sludge pre-dewatering, but then I have the heat to deal with, right? And so Howard had mentioned also, you have a unit that's this size or this size, and it's the Goldilocks. This one fits just right. And so in that scenario, I'm kind of thinking, is it beneficial to treat the digested sludge when you maybe have 500,000 gallons a day? Or is it better, these PFAS partitioning studies we've been doing the last 5 years saying, well, 90% of it partitions in your primary solids versus your WAS. Is it better to treat the primary sludge before it goes into digestion? Because then I can take the benefit of the heat into my digestion, and that reduces the overall heating footprint on the plant. So I could treat a much smaller waste with one of your smaller units, get the benefit of the heat and get the PFAS out before it even goes to digestion. So those are just kind of things I'm thinking, if I were to pilot something, these are scenarios, where's the right place to place it to take advantage of everything? So back to you, Sunny.
Awesome. That's an awesome thought process. And I want to point out here that you can have the cake and eat it too in this scenario, Jeff, because you could treat both your primary and secondary within your digesters and get all the biogas that you need, but not have to spend any of that biogas to produce heat because we have excess heat coming from our treatment. So you could then take this, the digestate, which has low calories at this point of time, because hopefully you've converted a lot of those carbons into methane. So you're left with a smaller fraction of solids with lower volatile compounds or volatile solids, which means we can further concentrate that before treating in a smaller system. So you can scale down the SCO system smaller because you have consumed some of the carbon upfront, so you're concentrating more. Plus, you're still able to get rid of the remaining carbon that's within the system, which means you're also simultaneously removing any organic waste, including PFAS or pharmaceuticals, and all you're left with is the nutrient fraction that can be returned to the soil, and the heat that's generated could then be used for digestion heating instead of using your biogas. So your biogas could be cleaned and then possibly used as an RNG for pipeline quality or whatever the case might be, but you're still able to benefit from it. So we are not here to displace another technology. We could fit anywhere in the plant, or we could just be the end of pipe. So we will only treat the portion that others cannot. So you can have the cake and eat it too.
Got a lot of great phrases coming through here. I can have your cake and eat it too. We've got the Goldilocks syndrome. We've got the you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. So I'm going to give you guys points if you can come up with more of these fun phrases. One question that just came through is about the 3M lawsuits. One of you just mentioned it. Was it Jeff or Howard? Is Jeff?
Yeah.
So before answering, maybe you could answer the question about how the 3M lawsuits might ultimately bring funding for these new technologies, but maybe just back up a little bit and explain what these lawsuits are, what's happening. There's some really big lawsuits out there right now.
So that's a class action lawsuit by many of it's mostly the states and the cities and the water utility companies who are bearing the brunt of all these remediation efforts and have to pass that on to their ratepayers. And so it's a class action lawsuits against 3M and the manufacturers of the PFAS, the foaming agents that were used at all these military bases. And so that's been ongoing, and every once in a while you see it raise its head that they're working on settlements and stuff like that. But the push is to try to make them, like Sonny mentioned, make the manufacturers and the producers responsible for the remediation efforts and all the costs that have been borne out by these water utilities for treating.
And could these settlements potentially bring funding for some of these new technologies? That's the question.
I think right now the settlement is dictated at the end users who are bearing the litigants in the case. I'm sure there will be some set aside for alternate technologies for sure.
So on the topic of overcoming barriers to adoption, Jeff, did you want to add anything to that? Any lessons that you've seen? I know you're a big proponent of pilots and experimentation and research-based, evidence-based actions. What have you seen to drive adoption of new technologies in your state that we might be able to learn from here?
Yeah, I think the key is, I think Howard hit on it first, those leading edge, cutting edge. You really, it doesn't do much good for, an individual entity to do a pilot. It's better when there's a consortium, especially if you're linked with like a Water Research Foundation, EPA, or some other agency, so that wealth and knowledge is shared amongst a bigger group. And and when you are doing these pilots, go to conferences and present that work so that it can be built upon by others too. If you're doing it in a vacuum and you've got this great little tool, but you're sitting on it and people aren't aware of it, well, then you haven't done a service to our industry.
That's a great point. Sunny, what would you add? Yeah, no, I totally agree with both the speakers. I do agree. I just want to point out that we have done some work on pilot or demonstration studies with the EPA in the past. We haven't done any with WRF yet. Of course, our efforts are going towards bringing these technologies online at facilities so we could learn from it. But just quickly wanted to point out that, one of the questions you asked earlier was about the viability of these technologies being around and any examples from the past. So I just want to point out that, we can totally remove PFAS from the ecosystem. So this is not a pipe dream. This is not something that we are imagining we can do, but not able to do. But if you look back, We had problems with CFCs because of ozone depletion. We were able to replace that compound completely, so we are able to restore the ozone that protects us. More recently, we have done work on nutrient removal from wastewater that were entering water bodies that had high propensity for eutrophication, like Chesapeake Bay comes to my mind because I was in Virginia at the time. So it's totally possible to go after a big global challenge and solve it. I have no doubt that we also have technologies that are able to do that, to remove PFAS from the ecosystem. My concern is how much more longer do we have to wait for doing something about it? Because we have known about PFAS since the 50s. We have known of the challenges that PFAS has or the impact it has on human beings and animals since the 80s, but we still haven't, outside of just banning the use of a few compounds, we really haven't done anything that's concrete enough to bring about the change of completely removing PFAS from the ecosystem. Clearly, it starts with source control, like both the speakers mentioned. You have to stop the polluters from manufacturing it and using it. That's where it really starts. From then onwards, everything else that we do is going to compound and add to this to the mechanism of removing this completely from our ecosystem.
So let's go through a couple of audience questions kind of rapidly because there's a number of them. So one is, when and how will these technologies be available to global markets? So outside of the United States, anybody can answer.
I'll go first. Although we are a small company with about 35 employees, but our ambition and our reach are global. We have employees across the world. So Lisa right now is in Spain, for example. We are, if you have a need, if you have a challenge that you believe our technology can solve, we'll find a way to work with you and make that happen.
Howard, Jeff, anything to add? If not, we go on to the next question. Okay, this is a bit of a longer one. I'm going to read it. What are the primary components of biosolids that contribute to the beneficial reuse aspect? What parts can be retained after they're treated with SQO? Are there any concerns related to converting sequestered carbon to CO2 with some destructive treatment technologies from a greenhouse gas point of view?
Yeah, that looks like a question that came directly to me, so I would answer them. Number one is typically in biosolids, we are looking at a couple of macronutrients like ammonia and phosphorus that we generally return back to nature in the form of a fertilizer or a soil amendment. Carbon, of course, comes into play in the dust bowl, or places where it's more arid to improve the soil quality. In the case of SCO, we are getting rid of the carbon. So we are converting almost all of the carbon into carbon dioxide, which I'll cover about the GHG aspect of it. We are also converting all of the ammonia or nitrogen into, the ammonia into nitrogen, N2. So that goes away. We only retain the phosphorus. So now if you look at what we could manufacture versus what we mine, you can produce carbon. You can grow trees, you can grow plants, or you can have animals to make babies. You can produce ammonia, you can produce nitrogen in a factory, but you cannot produce phosphorus. You have to mine it from the ground. And there's a finite amount of phosphorus. So once you run out of phosphorus, you're out of it. So you have to recover that fraction. And that's the only thing that we recover from a process. The reason we do that is by eliminating the carbon, we're also ensuring that we're eliminating this contaminants, because pretty much all of the toxins that we deal with are organic compounds. As far as the impact on GHG or greenhouse gas, the carbon dioxide that we release into the atmosphere right now is mostly biogenic. So outside of just the startup fuel that we use, which is fossil fuel, pretty much every bit of other carbon dioxide that we emit into the atmosphere comes from carbon that's already been sequestered in your sludge or other waste. So we are not generating new carbon dioxide. However, we do take into account those carbon dioxide when we do our GHG math. And in general, it's still far lower than other technologies that are out there, especially because we are not converting those carbons into something very reductive like methane or N2O. So in other words, even with all of the carbon dioxide that we put out, which can be sequestered, but assume that we don't, it's still far better than any other technology that we have currently to managing these types of wastes.
Thank you. And thank you to an audience member who's actually answering the questions from another audience member. So well done. Thank you, Wendy. So Howard, here's a question you might be able to shed some light on. The question is about RO. Maybe you could define what that means. And is RO a method that can be used to get PFAS out of waste?
I don't know if you can design a system big enough to really do that. That's certainly not my area of expertise. I might defer to Jeff on that as far as our role goes.
Jeff, can you explain what RO is and shed any light on this question?
That's precisely why people are using adsorptive carbons, because it's just far too expensive to use any kind of RO. And RO only works when you have a clean water source. You would be fouling and have so much backwash. You could never use it on a wastewater scenario. And that's precisely why everyone is using activated carbon right now to strip out the PFAS compounds. It's the cheapest alternative out there.
So yeah,
Can you define
RO is reverse osmosis. It's usually done with a very tightly woven membrane. So yeah, it's primarily used in drinking water or desalination application. Not very common or very unlikely unless you're doing some potable reuse that you would use RO in wastewater treatment.
Thank you. Well, an hour has gone by really fast. You guys are great speakers, very knowledgeable, great public servants, really trying to make a difference here. We're going to wrap this up with a lightning round. And the question for you is, what is the one thing that you'd love people to remember from the conversation today? And I'll start. So it gives you another few seconds to think about that. And I was really intrigued by what you guys were talking about in terms of collaboration and consortiums. And let's not hoard the innovations. Let's do this together with groups in regional centers or larger scale collaborative pilots. And let's get the word out there. Let's share this at conferences. Like that's incredible to drive collective action in the space. We need to really collaborate and work together. So that's a great message. And Howard, I'll turn it over to you next. What's your one message that you'd like people to remember from today's conversation?
Well, I think you hit a lot of the high spots right there. We're going to have to collaborate on this, whether new partners or existing partners, and how we're going to solve this as an industry. We're not going to all solve it in a vacuum. And whatever technology is about, you bring it to the conferences, you write your white paper, you write your abstract, and don't be afraid to present. And a lot of times it's going to be the equipment manufacturers, whether it's you folks partnering with a utility or an end user. It's going to have to be a combination of that to help get the word out that yes, the technology works and it works in a real world situation. I think we've got a long road ahead of us. This is just the beginning. And let's just keep the passion going to help the environment and help society move forward on it.
Thank you, Howard. Jeff, what's your one message?
I agree. My main driver is to drive innovation. And so if you have a challenge, in your community, you're not alone. Somebody else is dealing with the same thing. And if you have an idea, share it, reach out and partner with somebody and partner with all of us on some of these research projects. If there's always room for more and driving innovation, it improves our communities and it improves our industry. So get on board.
Yeah.
Sunny, what's your one message?
Yeah, so water and wastewater are essential services. So, and I want the audience to know that they play no part in creating or compounding this PFAS or emerging contaminant problem. They're trying to solve it. So I urge everyone to support the efforts in not just solving this problem by reducing at source, but also help in implementation of state-of-the-art technologies including but not limited to our supercritical water oxidation in solving this global challenge. With that, I would just want to thank everyone for participating and having me on this call.
You all for joining. Thanks to all the audience members for your active participation. And I think this is the first time I've moderated a session where audience members were answering the questions themselves. So really appreciate that. Check the different QA rooms before leaving, because you'll see there's some links in there that Jeff has provided. And somebody just asked if we can see a recording of this great session. And yes, we will post this on the 374 Water YouTube channel as soon as possible, probably in the next 24 hours. We'll put it also on LinkedIn, so it should be easy to find. And thanks to Sunny, to Jeff, to Howard for this great session. And thanks to the team behind the scenes, particularly Doron, who made this whole event possible. So have a great rest of your day. And thanks everyone for tuning in.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Bye.